Good morning or afternoon, depending on, or evening, depending on when you're watching this. Welcome back. Hope everybody had a fabulous weekend. Got some good rest. Maybe got outside, got some exercise. I know it was pretty cold, but next couple days are supposed to be really nice. So, glad to have you guys back. We're going to jump back into the civil rights movement, and we're going to learn today about a group known as the Freedom Riders. Riders being, as in riding a bus, not riders like writing papers. Um, so this starts with a court case in 1960, another Supreme Court case known as Boynton versus Virginia. It's another passing of civil rights legislation that says it outlaws segregation in transportation in all of the South, like buses. So because think back to the Rosa Parks incident. Uh, there's no Supreme Court case that follows directly after Rosa Parks. There's the Civil Rights Act, but that didn't explicitly itself outlaw uh, segregation in transportation. Um, or if it did, it was kind of included as a blanket coverage, but it wasn't enforced. Well, here's Boynton versus Virginia, 1960, where it is on the books, it's outlawed. But again, Southern states did not enforce that law or did not enforce desegregation of really anything up to that point. And federal lawmakers or federal prosecutors did not go after anybody that was uh, still segregating. Like the South was still very much segregated in 1960 and 61, and they weren't enforcing the laws that they had put in place. Now, the first Freedom Ride starts in Washington, D.C. This was a plan of civil rights activists to ride Greyhound buses from DC to New Orleans, Louisiana, and they're going to go through the hotbed of racial tension through major cities in the South. And they're going to ride the bus, African Americans riding really anywhere in the bus that they want, refusing to leave or refusing to move because of their right to any seat on the bus. And it gets very messy. It's going to get very violent, and it's going to bring about a lot of publicity. Now, the Freedom Riders were originally 13 members. Now, this movement grows massively, and there's multiple Freedom Rides. But the first one, the most influential one, was the one leaving DC going to New Orleans. So one of the two original Greyhound buses, as it heads into Alabama. Anderson, Alabama is very close to the border, and it's one of the first towns you get to on that route in Alabama. And the city mayor or police chief, can't remember which one, probably both, but they allow the local Ku Klux Klan to usher the bus into town. Actually, they couldn't even wait before, like a couple miles outside of town, before it gets into Anniston, Alabama. They cut off the road, they force the bus to stop, and big mob, a big white mob surrounds the bus, pushes it side to side, throws rocks through the windows, throws basically like a Molotov cocktail, if you know what that is, uh, a ball of fire. They throw it into the bus, and they keep all the exits on the bus blocked, so no one can leave. And they're planning on just letting the bus explode, killing everyone on board. And local police kind of watch this go by. They watch all the previous stuff happen, not do anything, which is going to be a recurring issue. But once the whole bus gets set aflame, that kind of freaks people out or freaks police out. So it was reported that one of the officers fires his gun up in the air and scares the mob off, or at least makes them back up and allow the citizens off the bus. Now, when they get off the bus, the mob attacks them again and physically beats them up, um, sends multiple people to the hospital. Um, but the others are able to board another Greyhound bus and continue. Now, the other bus makes it to Birmingham, Alabama, and in Birmingham, they are met by an angry mob and they are attacked and beaten. They're pulled off of the bus, beaten with bats, crowbars, bike chains, just horrific things. And even the driver gets attacked. And the police, again, stand and watch it happen. Now, the police, in a lot of these places, the police were actually, not all of them, but I'm sure a considerable amount, were members of the KKK. So they were probably a part of the organizing of this. So these people are pulled off buses, beaten within an inch of their lives. Some are sent to the hospital, where in Birmingham they were refused service. If the hospital heard about the Freedom Riders, and when these people showed up to the hospital beaten to a pulp, the hospital turns them away because hospitals were still against the law segregated. Even the white people that were injured, like even the white Freedom Riders, they were not allowed. They were forced to seek help elsewhere. And this continues throughout the rest of the journey. Now, it picks up quite a bit of publicity, and the violence shown by the segregated South gets a lot of people on the side of the civil rights activists. And along the way, some of the Southern African Americans would volunteer to fill the seats on the bus of the previous bus riders that were now in the hospital. And it just seemed like every city they stopped at, it got worse, or it got more brutal. But they continue their trek, and when the bus reaches Montgomery, Alabama, word has reached back in Washington of the Freedom Riders, and the President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, sends in U.S. Marshals. He sends in peacemakers, or people that are supposed to try and ensure the journey's finished without any more violence, which again doesn't really work a lot. After more violence, JFK strikes a deal with the local government of Jackson, Mississippi, that says, if you guys promise not to attack and viciously beat the Freedom Riders, we will not intervene in you enforcing your laws. Meaning JFK was giving the Jackson, Mississippi police the okay to arrest the Freedom Riders. Now, that's ridiculous to me, seeing as now it's still on states' laws that buses are to be segregated. Those haven't been taken off the books yet, but they should be, they should be canceled or be overruled by federal law, which it was a national law that these could not be segregated. But JFK waived his power in that sense to appease the violent mobsters in the South. So the ride stops in, I don't remember what part of Mississippi, but the ride basically stopped. JFK actually uh, condemns the Freedom Riders and says, you guys have caused way more harm than good, because this is in the middle of the Cold War and the Soviet Union is claiming America is racist and dumb, and how can they handle the rest of the world when they can't even handle their own citizens? So he thought this is a bad look, and he tells them to stop it, knock it off. And so the Greyhound buses are stopped in Mississippi, short of their goal of New Orleans. But that doesn't stop the movement. The riders decide to board a plane back in Jackson, Mississippi, and fly the rest of the way to New Orleans. Now, the plane ends up getting there, and they arrive in New Orleans, but they had to vacate the plane before initially taking off due to a bomb threat. So, yeah, the mobsters did not stop once they left the bus. Now, in 1962, a man by the name of James Meredith, he is a World War II vet, or no, sorry, he is not. He is a Korean War vet. He graduated high school in Mississippi. He goes to Jackson State for 2 years and then joins the military. And he spends 8 or 9 years in the military. So he comes back home, and he is 28 or 29 years old, and he applies for the University of Mississippi, which everyone refers to as Ole Miss. And he's rejected. He's inspired by JFK's inaugural address, in which he speaks to civil rights movement. And the very next day he applies, knowing he's going to get rejected, and he does. And so he takes that rejection and takes it to the federal courts and challenges it. And the University of Mississippi and Mississippi state government fight him over it, with the governor saying that as long as he is in office, University of Mississippi will never be desegregated. Now, this is after 8 years after the decision of Brown versus Board, which desegregated educational facilities. But again, the state had not followed that plan, and the federal government had not done a good job of enforcing it until now. And Meredith continues to push the case. James Meredith was a very good student, and he had a sterling military record. He had never been in trouble. Like, if anyone was to force their way into a segregated college or an all-white college, James Meredith was probably going to be the most successful one. So he continues to push and force, and with the help of a man named Medgar Evers, who we'll talk about on the next slide, he's finally admitted after a year and a half after initially applying. He is admitted into Ole Miss, and he only has 2 years left he only has 1 year left because he went to college in Jackson State beforehand. He goes through a bunch of abuse. He's beaten, he's picked on, he's ostracized, ignored. And in his time there, actually, he inspires another African American to apply at Ole Miss, and he gets in. Khalif McDowell, I think was his name. And they become roommates. Now, Meredith graduates in 1963, which I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, I need to go back over this. Medgar Evers, who is a civil rights activist, works and helps James Meredith get in to the University of Mississippi. Evers, years before, had applied to get into Mississippi Law School, which he was not admitted to. Riots on campus led to, and the federal government moving National Guard in to allow Meredith into the university. Shots are fired and 2 mobsters are killed and another 160 are injured. Meredith graduates after 1 year. Continuation. So it was about 3 years total in college. Graduates with a degree in political science. Now, I said he was roommates with Cleve McDowell. McDowell was only a freshman, so Meredith graduates and then leaves. And with him leaves the federal protection. He had some bodyguards. And when he left, so did the bodyguards, because Meredith was a major national star and McDowell was an afterthought. So he leaves, and then McDowell asks the university if he can carry a registered weapon on him, a handgun, like a conceal and carry. And they said no. But he did anyway because he was very fearful of his safety, and he was caught, and he was thus expelled because of it. Now, unfortunately, Medgar Evers is assassinated really actually before Meredith graduates. He's assassinated in June of '63. He was a very marked man by white terrorist nationalists. He feared for his life very much, and he was killed right outside of his own home. He got out of the car and he was shot in the back by Byron De La Beckwith, a member of the White Man's Council, which was a white supremacy group, just like the KKK was. And De La Beckwith was he was charged and taken to court, and he was tried by a jury of all white people. And the first trial resulted in a hung jury, which means that they couldn't agree if he was guilty or not. And then he's tried again with an all-white jury. And again, they can't agree that he's guilty, so he's let go. And it's not until 1994 when the case is reopened and brought back up, and they decided to allow a few African Americans to join the jury, that Byron De La Beckwith is found guilty, and he's sentenced to prison, and he ends up dying in prison. But it was 30 years after the initial act that he was finally found guilty. And then in 1966, James Meredith, who was inspired by Evers and appreciative of his assistance after Evers is assassinated, Meredith becomes an advocate for civil rights. And in 1966, he begins on a march against fear, where he was going to march 220 miles from Nashville, Tennessee to Jackson, Tennessee, or Jackson, Mississippi, I believe was the destination. And he was going to walk it. And he didn't want a bunch of others along with him. He didn't want this to seem like a big mob or seem threatening or violent. This was going to be a one-man show. He turned away assistance from CORE, from the Congress of Racial Equality, or from the SCC, or from any of those groups. He does it on his own, and in the second day, very early in the trip, he is shot. Now, he's not killed, but he's put in the hospital. And again, media attention swirls around it and inspires many different activists to take up his place and finish the march. And 4,000 people finished the march for him. And Meredith becomes a staple in the civil rights movement. He even becomes a politician in the 80s and 90s. So That's James Meredith and Medgar Evers and the Freedom Riders. Today's central question: who was the first African American student admitted to the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss? Very simple question. We just talked about it quite a bit. The assignment is posted on Classroom. This time I've created the Google Doc, so that way you don't have to feel like you have to create one and then I can't track it. So it's a blank document right now. Go and add the essential question and the answer. We do have a Zoom meeting at 2 o'clock today. If you could make it, fantastic. We'll have a question today. We'll talk a little bit and just check in some. So that will be it for today. Hope you guys have a great day. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out. But so long.